everybody, my name is Kumar and welcome to another Genshin Invokation TCG video. Today, as we're nearing about the halfway point in the patch, I've decided to show you all what I think are the best decks within the current metagame, starting with what is possibly the best one, which is Crab. Now, the reason Crab is so good is because of the introduction of Citlali, who basically fixed all of Crab's weaknesses. Previously, you've had characters like Thoma, who seems great, but because you have to sit on him the whole game to gain the shields, he's constantly under threat as the shields are not going to Thoma, they're going to Crab. So you've previously had an issue of your characters requiring you to stay on them. Lila is a character that's been used with Crab that didn't have that issue, right? She was on standby. She usually provided you value through her status effect, not through herself. She could die and still provide you value, but that value was actually a bit too slow. Citlali fixes both of those problems. Citlali gives you cryo much faster and gives you more shields, again, much faster, while doing all of that off field. It's to the point where, honestly, you don't even need a third character. You don't even need action cards all that often, because Tenacity the Millilith gives you 2 shields around, but guess what? Citlali can give you like 8. Obviously, Tenacity is still great. I would still love to see Tenacity. I would still love to play Tenacity. I would still love to play the talent. But honestly, it's to the point where you don't even really need that many action cards. You don't even need to use your characters that effectively. You can probably just beat most decks by sitting on Crab the whole game, because you are going to be slowly chipping away at them, slowly gaining more shields, and they're just going to try their hardest to break your shields, but they're gonna end up failing because you just get too many of them. Crab is honestly incredibly overtuned. Citlali, I think, is a great character, but not really in need of nerfs. But I think specifically with Crab, I think there doesn't need to be one. I think it's ridiculous that she gives you like if she gives you like 5 shields around, that's obviously really good, but that's situational. You need to like react, you need to use abundant phlogiston to get extra night soul points. Like, you need a lot to gain 5 shields with her, but Crab turns those into 10, and that's just a bit too much. I feel like they should make it so Crab gives you as many shield, or Crab gets as many shields as you currently have. Like, the 1 shield from Citlali becomes 1 for Crab instead of 1 becoming 2. But either way, the Crab is just in such a ridiculous state. It is just the best deck, realistically. Like, there are ways to beat it, obviously, but if you need a deck where you can just queue it up, turn your brain off, and just kind of win effortlessly against, honestly, most decks, Crab would be the one. It's mostly effortless because, as I said, you don't even need a third character. I've seen people play Candace, I've seen people play Herald, I've seen people play Lila, and I've seen people play Sethos. And honestly, I think Sethos is the best option. I think this is actually the best Crab deck. I think this is the best deck, as Sethos is here to answer other Crab decks. Now, this might seem surprising, as a lot of you may know I hate Sethos, but that's because of his skill and his burst. I have always loved his passive, which is exactly what we're using him for here. His passive, for those that don't know, when you have 4 energy, he can consume the 4 energy when he does a normal attack and deal 5 piercing damage to the lowest health target. Now, what is a 5 health target that you would need piercing damage to take out within this metagame? That's right, that's Crab. So while you're doing your Citlali Crab things, if you run into another Crab, you can just Calx's Arts on Sethos, normal attack once, and their Crab is just dead. It's to the point where this is the only real threat to you as a Crab player. Well, there are other threats that you might see, but this is like the biggest one. Another Crab that's running Sethos is the biggest issue that a Crab deck may run into, and it's to the point where you should be running glittering gemstones to have a guaranteed way to get up to 6 HP to avoid that Sethos insta-kill. Now, obviously, Mystique Soup can also give you some extra max HP. It can give you some healing after you've taken the damage from Sethos, after you've used glittering gemstones, but realistically, you need that guaranteed way to protect yourself from Sethos. Sethos in other matchups does not matter, just like any other third character. They're really just here to be here. You are going to be winning most matchups just by Citlali and Crab. Even if you had like a better, like a quote unquote better third character, you still wouldn't be swapping to them. So Sethos really is just like a tech card. He's just occupying the slot specifically for the mirror match, and that's all he really needs to do, as the mirror match is honestly your biggest problem. There's really no other decks that can compete with what Crab is doing. Now, one deck that tried really hard to compete early on in the patch is Traffic Light. Traffic Light is still good, and I do believe it's like the second best deck in the metagame, but as the patch started, this seemed like it was the thing to beat until Crab came around, and it had just so many shields that it really didn't care about Traffic Light. Now, what this deck does is it's possibly one of the best aggro decks we've seen, just because of how flexible it is and how much it does with very little, honestly. Mavoika's skill only costs 2. She gives you a discard target that can deal 1 damage. She gives you a way to deal 2 more pyro damage passively. Obviously, you get reactions off of that. Kniech, when you trigger burning or when other characters use techniques, gains Night Soul points and eventually gets grapples. The grapples, when you swap into him, are going to be dealing dendro damage, or when the action goes back to him, but because you can swap around a lot, oftentimes your opponent is going to pass it around before you do, and because you're going to be the only one that can take actions, just swapping into him will immediately broke the grapple links, and obviously you can get that for basically free as by just doing Kachina techniques. So all in all, you're using Mavuika's skill, getting her passive up, and when you use Kachina techniques, you're going to be doing extra pyro damage. You're going to be using also Kniech skill, and then when you use Kachina techniques, that's going to be giving him Night Soul points, which he can then use to deal extra dendro damage. We're basically just swapping back to him. Another character that loves swapping here is Kachina herself. If you don't have enough dice to use your technique, or you can realistically use a swap to gain a similar result. You know, her summon is not gonna deal 3 damage, but it's gonna deal 2, and you get it for just swapping. So in a round, what you're usually gonna do is, as I said, start with Mavuika skill, maybe play a Conductors, discard the bike, set a Kniech skill, get burning, get some Night Soul points, go to Kachina, do some techniques, get some stacks on Kniech. If you got the burning earlier on, you realistically just need 3 Kachina techniques, and then you need to swap out of her into Kniech, which is gonna trigger her summon, trigger him to deal some dendro, then you swap back out of him, then you swap back in, that's gonna deal some even more dendro, and the way you get all of those swaps is Dawn Winery throughout every round is gonna be giving you free swaps. Changing Shifts is gonna give you 1 free swap. Gandharvaville is honestly a great card here that you can use to get 1 extra dice every round when you're at 0. Obviously, that's great for swaps because you can get a free swap with something like Changing Shifts. You go from 0 to 1 dice, you swap to Kniech, you get value off of him, you get value off of Kachina, and you just keep going, going and going and going and going. One great card that has not seen play for a while is Fish and Chips. That is just ridiculous here because you get to use all of your skills every round, all the time. This deck just does so much with so little. Because you only need like 2 pyro dice, you do need like 3 dendro, but guess what? Your Conductors is gonna fix those dice. You do need a bunch of Geo dice with Kachina, but you're gonna get a bunch of discounts from Atea or from Saurus Crackers. You're gonna get some Omni dice from Boar Princess. You're gonna get some extra Night Soul points from Abundant Foggystone to get some extra pyro damage from Mavuika, or to get some extra techniques off of Kachina, and it honestly is kind of ridiculous. On top of all of that, as you're using all of those Night Soul points, you're gonna get a bunch of Fighting Spirit stacks like it's nothing on Mavuika, and she's gonna be able to deal 6 damage for just 4 dice, and then be able to deal 3 extra pyro for free essentially. When you keep doing those Kachina skills, those Kachina skills. And obviously it just gets crazier as the game goes on. Kachina Burst is also scary. Cage Burst not as much, but it's still nice to have, and it just adds up. They just keep piling on extra effects on and on and on and on and on, and they just keep chipping you down. You really, really, really need heavy survivability to deal with this deck sometimes. It's kind of ridiculous. Now, one deck that might be an answer to both of those, it's not great into either one, but it works just fine, is Clorinde. She does have survivability. She works great against these decks that do damage little by little, as she has, Day of Resistance, or as she can do, as Kachina needs multiple actions to deal the damage. She needs the skill and then technique and do it again and again and again. You can do like 2 normal attacks, then skill, that heals you for 4, then 2 normal attacks, then skill, that heals you for 4 again, and you keep threatening your opponent while healing yourself up. Also, because of Mavuika, allowing you to get a bunch of extra damage on your normal attacks, you can not only disrupt your opponent by swapping them out of the character they are currently on, which is obviously great for Crab, as Crab now wants to just stay on Crab. It can also be disruptive to the Traffic Light deck, because, well, yes, they do want to swap a lot. They want to swap after they've achieved certain things, after they've reached certain conditions. It's not as bothersome to swap them out as other decks as it would be to other decks, but it's still kind of annoying, and it's obviously just a lot of damage. It's with a weapon, Clorinde's normal attacks become 2 damage. With Mavuika's passive, they become 5. You have Abundant Phlogiston, which can give you extra uses of those passive for free. You are oftentimes going to need to reuse the skill once or twice within a game, but after you do that, you're probably just going to win. I'm going to be honest with you. Against most decks, Clorinde is kind of autopilot. You just sit on her and you just win the game. You do like a single Mavuika skill. You use like Serpent, who's only here to shuffle in blocks into your deck. You use those blocks to get 1 extra dice, discard the bikes that you get from Mavuika for a little bit of extra pyro, and you just win the game on Clorinde. It plays kind of similar to other Clorinde decks, except this one gets online much faster. The Aramite deck typically tended to like full ramp on round 1 and then use Aramite Burst, and then you went on Clorinde. Here you can go on Clorinde as soon as the game begins. Like, you just do a single Mavuika skill and then you're ready to go. The deck is as scary as it's ever been, and honestly, it's probably going to keep getting scarier. Clorinde is an incredible card, and Mavuika has only solidified that. The matchup into Crab and Traffic Light is obviously not the best ever, but it's good enough to the point where I would put this as one of the like top 3 decks. Crab, Traffic Light, and this, I feel like, are the top 3 decks this patch, as they all have great matchups into everything that's not Crab. And then some of them have decent matchups into Crab, some of them have bad matchups in Crab, some of them are Crab. But all in all, those are just great decks that if you were to bring to some sort of a tournament, even though weeklies are currently not active this patch, if you were to bring them to some sort of a tournament, you would probably do just fine. I would not blame anybody for picking any of those decks in a tournament. They're all fantastic choices. Now, as for more questionable choices, or in other words, honorable mentions, we have Sayu. What a lot of you might not remember is that Sayu was able to be played in the form... Sayu, when she was meta-dominant, was not the first patch where she could do that. Like, for some reason, there were multiple patches where she wasn't played, even though she could have been played in the form that she eventually was played in. But she popped up when Crab was popular. Sayu was available for multiple patches before Crab popped up, but she just wasn't seeing play. The second Crab did pop up, she was just the number 1 counter to it because of Wolf's Gravestone. Now, obviously, Crab did figure out ways to deal with her, but it had to put in some tech cards, it had to play in some like weird ways, but like it really had to put in effort to deal with Sayu, and it kind of still does. Obviously, it's much easier for it to play now. Like, it is kind of autopilot, and it does still have some answers, but realistically, Sayu is never really going to be a bad option against Crab. It is kind of a bad option against Traffic Light. It is kind of a bad option against Clorinde, or actually it's a very bad option against both, as you might have noticed in the Clorinde deck. For example, it's running Tada, specifically to unfreeze Clorinde, so the freeze line here doesn't really do much. The Sayu line doesn't really do much because they're gonna swap you out, but this deck does fine against most decks, but it does great against Crab, which is why I'm mentioning it. Now, one reason it fell off is not because it's a terrible deck. One reason you might have not seen it much is not because it's a terrible deck, but because for some reason people decided that they wanted to make it terrible. They started running like Mirror Maiden, whose purpose is to be a worse Mona. People started running like Chongyun, who's an okay choice, but at the end of the day, all of the Claymores are okay choices. They like started to, for some reason they wanted to like slow down one of the fastest combo decks in the metagame, and I just don't understand that choice. But I mean, yeah, realistically, you can still bring this. Tada is also here, just in case you do run into freezes. That is a trend that you might notice among all of these decks, except for maybe Traffic Light, because Traffic Light can use all of their characters, but most of these decks are just focused on sitting on a single character and doing as much as possible on them, so freeze can be a bit worrisome, but just a single copy of Tada should be fine. Obviously, you can also use it on Mona with Heart of Kverna active to just draw an extra card. Might as well. Outside of that, it's just like a pretty standard Sayu list. You do have the Mystique Soup to potentially like either reduce the cost of your skills or protect yourself if you're running into something like a Traffic Light. But yeah, I mean, you don't have much hope against Traffic Light, I'm gonna be honest with you. This is mostly for Crab. The deck is fine against most other decks, but it's really bad against aggro decks, and it's pretty bad against Clorinde, which Clorinde has kind of turned into an aggro deck with the introduction of Mavlika. Outside of that though, deck should still be fine. Not the best option, not the worst option, but a decent counter pick into Crab. Outside of that, we have worse Traffic Light, or as you might remember it, Kachinavia. This is one of two decks that was very dominant last patch that you're going to be seeing today. I'm also going to be mentioning the other one. Some of you might know what I'm talking about, but the idea of this deck is just to get a bunch of crystallizers with Mavlika and Kachina, apply some pressure early, and then those crystallizers are going to shuffle in bullets that you can then use with Navia to close out the game. It is very similar to the Traffic Light deck. In fact, this came first, technically, but realistically, you have no reason to be playing this when you have Traffic Light. You're trading a decent amount of early power for some late game sustain that is still not enough to deal with Crab. I don't think Navia is enough to deal with Crab in very many cases. I think Wolfia might be. I think if playing Wolf Lord in Navia is a decent answer to Crab, as that's constant piercing damage. But that's a completely different conversation. And if you're looking to target Crab that bad, honestly, just play Sayu, you know? This deck is not good, not bad, it's just somewhere in the middle. It's a decent choice that's worse than other options that play very similarly. You could play it, but I wouldn't recommend it. Another honorable mention is the other deck that I was alluding to from the previous patch, which is Zhongli Chiori. This time with Setlali. As it turns out, Setlali is just it just goes great with them. She can obviously apply some cryo, which you can then crystallize, but the deck has never really cared for reactions much, and she gives them a bunch of extra shields, which they obviously do like. The deck also has to run Vortex Vanquisher in a way to deal with Crab. One thing to note is that Zhongli's burst is not a freeze. Tada will not deal with it. Crab's talent will not deal with it. So at any point in time, if you have Zhongli burst, Crab should be relatively scared. Obviously, it shouldn't be that scared because realistically, you can't really do enough damage to threaten them. Obviously, you're doing a lot of damage with summons every single round, but Crab can easily keep up. And honestly, that's one of the biggest things keeping this deck away from being one of the best within the metagame. It's just the fact that it can't deal with Crab. It was fantastic last patch. as it could deal with most things while having more survivability, but honestly, Crab has kind of taken the role of this deck. This deck previously gained a bunch of shields while dealing a bunch of damage relatively passively. Tada appears once again, just in case of freeze. But yeah, I mean, the list is pretty much what it would have been last patch, just with Sidlali now, because Sidlali is just a good character in these kinds of decks. This is once again a deck that I wouldn't recommend you run over something like a Crab or a Clorinde or a Traffic Light, but it is an option that exists. It is still very good. Honestly, it is better than last patch because Sidlali is just a great addition to it, but it's just not a good metagame for it. It just isn't.